Buongiorno, ben ritrovati il terzo giorno di Wired Next Fest. Information wants to be free è uno dei, motti di Internet e di come abbiamo sempre pensato che Internet dovesse essere. In realtà gli ostacoli alla libera circolazione dell'informazione e dei dati online sono di diversa natura e la legislazione sul copyright in tutto il mondo sta spesso diventando uno dei peggiori e più gravi ostacoli alla libera circolazione delle informazioni. Creative Commons è sia un modo di intendere la conoscenza e la circolazione dei contenuti online e non solo, ed è anche un'organizzazione. Grazie a Creative Commons è possibile condividere online qualsiasi tipo di contenuto e di dati, informazioni di qualsiasi genere, modificando in un certo senso la legislazione sul copyright, decidendo di concedere agli utenti alcuni diritti senza riservarseli tutti nella propria interezza. Creative Commons in questo modo consente a chiunque di utilizzare internet in modi più equi, modi più aperti, come inizialmente doveva essere. Wired Italia, ad esempio, il nostro sito è pubblicato con una licenza Creative Commons, il che significa che i nostri lettori possono riutilizzare i nostri contenuti. Il copyright, dicevamo, sta diventando, o almeno il modo in cui viene inteso oggi il copyright, in determinati casi, ad esempio come nella editoria accademica, sta diventando un problema. Proprio qualche giorno fa Diego Gomez, un ricercatore colombiano, è stato dichiarato innocente da capi d'accusa che lo avrebbero potenzialmente portato in carcere per 8 anni per aver condiviso dei paper accademici protetti da copyright. Questo è un problema e oggi parleremo di come Creative Commons sta cercando e sta facendo un eccellente lavoro per risolvere questa situazione e ne parleremo con Ryan Merkley, che è il CEO di Creative Commons. Grazie.
Grazie. Good morning, buongiorno. It's Saturday or it's Sunday, so I'm gonna sit with you and we'll have a master class in copyright. And if no one falls asleep, that will be good. I promise I won't talk about copyright the entire time, but I do want to talk a little bit about Creative Commons. I want to talk about the future of copyright, but I also want to talk about innovation and sharing, which is at the heart of what we do. And these two things are supposed to be intimately linked, the idea of copyright and the idea of sharing and collaboration. Copyright was actually supposed to drive innovation. It was supposed to encourage discovery and motivate creativity. But I think those of us who have followed these issues know that this is not even remotely the case. Today, even the idea of sharing has been twisted into this alternate reality that we call the sharing economy. Things like Uber and TaskRabbit and Airbnb, but let's be honest, these things aren't actually sharing. If you have to pay for it, it's not sharing. Sharing is a gift. These are services. And rebranding sharing as something that it isn't actually damages something that is fundamental to the work that we do as a species. And I actually want to talk for a minute about us as a species. So Martin Novak is a Harvard professor, and he does research around the science of collaboration and the underpinnings of evolution. He uses mathematical formulas to calculate the ways in which we collaborate and advantage each other in society. Martin says that humanity's story is both about competition, which we're familiar with, but actually also about cooperation, and that the two go intricately together. He says, and this is my favorite line from him, it's not just a struggle for survival, but also a snuggle for survival. Now, while Darwin's research actually recognized the same thing and showed cooperation amongst animals, but some people still, I think quite foolishly, argue that we shouldn't cooperate, that we should advantage ourselves, that we should look out for ourselves first, and we should never help our fellow humans. That we're expected, especially in copyright, to exploit our creative works for the maximum financial possible benefit, like a lottery ticket that we hold on to tightly in hopes that it's worth that billion-dollar win. And the truth is so far away from that reality, or from that wish. They suggest that to do anything otherwise than exploit our creative works is to do what the Copyright Society of the United States once told me was turning wine into water. But the data actually says that we should do exactly that. We should turn wine into water. We should share. Adam Grant wrote a book called Give and Take, and he talked about how those who give first are actually best positioned to win later. That the more you give, the better you do. Giving doesn't just help the giver, it also helps, it also inspires more giving. It creates a culture of giving. When researchers actually studied giving, and this is Novak's research from Harvard, they found that when one person gave first, other people were more likely to contribute later, even with people who were not in the original group. The presence of a single giver, one person giving of themselves, was enough to establish the norm, to create a culture of giving. And sharing is not just a selfless act, obviously. It pays itself forward in reputation. In today's online communities, reputation is so valuable. Novak calls it indirect reciprocity. This idea, it's common in large, complicated communities where direct reciprocity is complicated or even impossible. Communities just like the ones that we have created on the web together. So individuals don't collect IOUs, they collect reputations to be known and to be valued. Anyone who's part of an online community knows how valuable it is in those communities for people to know who you are, to know the contribution that you make, and to appreciate it, to feel gratitude. We accumulate these benefits from others who give freely because of the norm that is created in those groups, the culture that we've created together. These aren't altruistic acts by any stretch. The feeling of gratitude is valuable and even addictive. But this is the massive power of sharing. Concurrent and lasting benefits multiplied for the giver, the receiver, and society. A number of years ago, I was at Massey College in Toronto, and I heard Stuart Brand speak. Stuart's the founder of an organization called the Long Now Foundation, and actually was one of the, or played an influential role in the founding of Wired magazine originally. So this is a scale model of a clock that they're building inside a mountain in Nevada. The actual clock will be hundreds of feet tall, and the clock will tick once a year. It is a monument to long-term thinking, encouraging people to imagine time horizons much greater than the lives that we will lead. Brand described, when I heard him speak, doing this long-term planning with governments and corporations on very, very long time horizons. I'm talking 50, 75, 100-year time horizons. And one of the things that he found is that when corporations think that far ahead, they stop thinking about share prices and quarterly reports and profit and loss statements, and they start thinking about community. They start thinking about collaboration. When they made these planning sessions with these corporations who were worried about shareholder value, they started asking questions about community, about infrastructure, about schools, because that's where their employees were going to go to work. But they were thinking not about today's employees, but actually the employees that would be the children of the people they would hire. Because once you're on a time horizon that long, as a corporation, you actually care about the city you're in and the infrastructure people have and your ability to hire and support those people as neighbors. They became cooperators and promoters of their self-interest at the same time. Collaboration and competition working together. So I would argue that if you graph any problem on the right time horizon, eventually the two lines intersect. So this is what we're building on the web, or at least it's supposed to be. The internet is the most powerful force for communication and collaboration and commerce that we've ever seen in human history. But do we really want to just build it out as a set of services and paywalled offerings? I think we could do better than that. The line between online communities and real life is completely blurred, if not gone altogether. This is real life. The internet is real life. It's where I go to work. It's where we tell our stories. It's where people fall in love. It is the place where we are building a new society. But if that society is going to be accessible and equitable and full of innovation, then it's actually going to require our leadership at the foundations of how we work. We're going to need to ask questions about the things that underpin society, and copyright, unfortunately perhaps, is a piece of that. So sharing's in our nature, which I described in the research, and it should be at the heart of copyright, which I came to talk about. But it's not. Far from it, really. Where the web should have enabled millions of permissive uses and collaboration and remix, instead, we got more restrictive copyright, longer terms of copyright, less freedom to use the content that we supposedly own. This was Lawrence Lessig's refrain. Lawrence spoke here at this conference last year, and this was the refrain from his book, Free Culture. Ours is a less and less free society. This is the reality in creativity and knowledge. Large rights holders, traditional publishers still set the terms for how we access knowledge, how we own it, how we share it, and they built their empires on top of freely available science and research and folklore, art, and culture. They essentially climbed the ladder on top of those works and then pulled it up behind themselves so no one else could use it. Lessig added in his book, the past always tries to control the creativity that builds upon it. The past is doing a pretty good job of this so far. By and large, the past has used its influence to ensure that copyright laws pretty much control all access to creativity and knowledge. Over the past 50 years, copyright has been twisted from something that was an optional, opt-in 14-year term of copyright to a term that is your life plus 70 years in most countries around the world. But all is not lost. I don't want to tell you a sad story on a Sunday morning. Creative Commons, the organization that I lead, is a global nonprofit that creates simple tools to allow people to share their works. They've used them to share them over 1.2 billion times. This is from our State of the Commons report, which we released just about a month ago. They've shared everything from photos to videos to scientific research to 3D models. But it shouldn't be this hard. Copyright should unlock creativity and innovation, shouldn't lock it up. We need to stop treating stop treating these works like property and start treating them like opportunity. Let me explain. Here's the mini copyright masterclass. Copyright, the right to exploit a creative work for a limited term, although when it's life plus 70 years, it doesn't feel that limited, is actually unlike any other property right. Copyright doesn't work like property, even though we think of it as intellectual property. In fact, it doesn't behave like property at all. And I'll give you 3 reasons why. If I take your horse, or I eat your sandwich, or I borrow your book, you don't have it anymore. I have it. And you can't have it again until I give it back to you. For hundreds of years, this idea that if I have the thing and you don't, then you don't have the thing, underpin the rules of property. And this was as true for creativity as it was for everything else, for books, for paintings, for manuscripts, for CDs. There was one copy, and if I had it, you didn't. If you had it, I didn't. But then the internet happened, and broadband happened, and massive online storage happened in the cloud, and copying became a thing that you do, as Cory Doctorow said, 1,000 times before breakfast. It's something you did every day. It's something you've already done today everywhere you went. And it's more or less free. So now when I have a digital copy of a book, so do you. When we can all have the same digital copy of a book, and everyone else also still has it. Economists call this a non-rival good. It's not like property. I can have it and you can have it at the same time. Is this a small difference? Not even remotely. This is a massive, massive difference. Since most of our laws and perceptions about property are predicated on this very idea of scarcity. With digital things, there is no scarcity, except for the false scarcity that we create in order to extract wealth. Second, works that can be copyrighted are each a product of everything that came before them. Everything is a remix. This is not true of horses or sandwiches or even the printed copies of books, but it is true of every single work of intellectual property in history. You don't get the Beatles without Chuck Berry. You don't get Chuck Berry without the blues. You don't get the blues without African folk songs sung by American slaves. Of course, there's originality. Of course, people add new things to the work, but everything is an iteration and born from either the things it copied or the things it rejected. Everything is a remix. This was actually why copyright terms had limits. Because we were all supposed to get those works back. It was the trade-off. It was a limited exclusive right for the creator, and then a broad and forever right for all of us that was supposed to happen. That's what the public domain is all about. but that's not even close to what we see today. Finally, since copyright was established in 1662 to regulate the copying of printed books, I might argue that the world has changed a little bit. A lot, actually. Copyright used to require registration and then renewals in order to ensure it's continuous. Now it is automatic for everyone, whether they want it or not. How many of you are copyright holders? Actually, every single one of you is a copyright holder. Every one. Because copyright is now automatic. The minute you take a photo on your phone, that photo is copyrighted for your life, plus, depending on what country you're in, 50 to 70 years. Every single one of you are copyright holders, and every single work you've ever created is automatically under copyright. So when I talk about copyright law, I am talking about a law that affects you and everything you've ever created, and everything you ever will create. So the combination of these three ideas, that copying can be done ad infinitum at nearly zero cost, that all creativity builds upon the work that came before it, and that the world of creators and copying has changed so dramatically as to be unrecognizable from when the law was written in 1662, we clearly need a new model for copyright that serves the public interest, not just private ones. Copyright laws are primarily written by large rights holders when every single person in this room, every single person on this planet holds copyright. So I'm not going to make policy proposals today. I promised you that I would only talk a little about copyright. But I want you to come with me for a minute on a bit of a thought experiment. I want you to think about the laws that we have on the books right now about long terms of copyright, about heavy restrictions about use and reuse. And I want you to think about it especially because here in Europe, the European Commission is reviewing the terms of copyright right now and considering changes that could dramatically affect what you're allowed to do online. I want you to think about the world of creators that we have unleashed through technology, through smartphones, through creativity, especially now that many of you just found out that you're copyright holders. And imagine, do those laws even come close to driving the kinds of things that we want? Innovation, collaboration, discovery, creativity. Or are they just built for a very small number of people to exploit them and profit? I think you know what I think the answer is. At some point in the next 20 years, it's going to become possible to book a commercial spaceflight, a suborbital trip from anywhere on the Earth to any other point on the Earth. Cape Town, China, Toronto, you name it, the trip will take less than 90 minutes. You can circle the entire globe in 90 minutes in a suborbital space flight. Think of how complicated the laws are going to have to be to make that work, to facilitate those flights. Spaceflight will go from something done by the very, very, very few, where someone who's done it would be someone that deserved to be a keynote speaker at a conference like Buzz Aldrin, who'll be here 5 hours from now, to eventually everyone. Everyone will take suborbital space flights. There will be thousands of trips a day, crossing international boundaries at the speed of 22,000 kilometers per hour, circling the Earth under thousands of communication space satellites and the International Space Station. Now imagine if we decided to govern that industry by taking the Highway Traffic Act and just adding the words "in space." That is pretty much what we have done with copyright laws around the world. We've taken an old law that was written over 400 years ago in its first iteration and added the words digital and online. And that's pretty much how today's copyright laws work. And it's no coincidence that when you have a law that is that ancient, that we keep running up against absurd outcomes. At a time when sharing was exploding, when services around the world, when everybody had a smartphone in their pocket that shoots 4K video, we made copyright automatic and set the default to closed. This added billions of copyrights overnight, often to people who didn't even know they had them. And as the internet made it easy and cheap to create databases of things, we no longer required copyrights to be registered, which made it impossible to find the owners of those copyrights. It's absurd. Or this example, which is my favorite absurd example, which is about freedom of panorama, the right to take photos of cultural works and often buildings in public spaces. It's a term you've probably never heard of, freedom of panorama. Did you know that here in Italy, it is illegal to take photos of public artifacts and public buildings and publish them? You don't own your own vacation photos from your trip here. The photos of public squares that you take, you do not have the right to publish them online. You could be sued for copyright for violating those terms if you don't have express permission. And there's an extra right here in Italy that requires you to ask an extra permission in order to publish those works. If that feels ridiculous to you, it's because it's ridiculous. Copyright wasn't written for the time of the internet. It wasn't even written at a time when regular people owned cameras. It was written for a time of book publishers. It was not written for a time when data could travel around the world in a second, or when astronauts traveled around the world at 22,000 kilometers per hour. It was written hundreds of years ago. And I'm under no illusions we're going to delete these old laws and start from scratch, but at least we could owe ourselves the opportunity to think about our goal: innovation, discovery, creativity. So consumers, all of us, now hold copyright, whether we like it or not. You can't get rid of it, whether you want it or not. We owe it to all of us, to ourselves, to have laws that actually function and meet those goals. How many creators were there in 1706 when the Statute of Anne, which is an ancient law that first codified copyright, was created? There were a few thousand, maybe a few thousand people who would have been implicated in a copyright law. Today, billions. And the number of works is in the trillions. But today, copyright is also just one issue for trade negotiations. It's maybe impossible to imagine the idea of taking copyright out of laws that also talk about car exports or the number of suits you're allowed to import from one country to the next. But we should at least acknowledge that today's copyright is not founded on the idea of reason, it's not founded on data, and it's not founded on evidence. And we should imagine, what could those laws be like if they were? Now, some people suggest that my comments about sharing and collaboration and use of works on the internet are not true. There's tons of sharing on the internet. But not for creators, not for innovators, not for those trying to lead for discovery, the people that we need to inspire and enable. Ask somebody who's tried to clear the rights for a documentary, or somebody who's been sued by a patent troll, or somebody who's received a copyright takedown notice after uploading something to YouTube. Ask a scientist who's trying to access papers so that they can do cancer research and bumps into a paywall asking $40 for every single paper they want to read. Or ask a teacher looking for the latest content for their underfunded school. Kids learn today that copyright is a thing you should be afraid of. It's something that if you touch, you will get sued, and your family will get sued. As Lessig said, ours is a less and less free society, but some of us are changing that. I'll talk a little bit about CC. Now, we didn't change copyright. Copyright stayed the same. Our licenses build on top of copyright. We created a release valve. It's a suite of free legal tools that anyone can use, and they're embedded in just about every open platform that you can name that allow you to share those works. And they've been shared over 1.2 billion times a year. Over 1.2 billion times to date. We're about 15 years old. Now, what's powerful to me about this number, 1.2 billion, is not the size, because in comparison to the number of works that are created every day, that's a very small number. But what's powerful is that every single person chose to share their work online. That's a very powerful thing. Now, CC is just one part of a big global commons that includes open source and open data and other communities like Mozilla and Wikipedia. And while we don't agree on everything, we all want the benefits of openness: opportunity, equity, innovation, transparency. But too much of today's discourse is about rights and individuals and corporations and the conflict of individualism and the public good. But it's a false choice. We need both together. We need both to work together in order to realize the benefits of society and to advance discovery and innovation. So I have 3 ideas that I want to leave you with, in the hope that they might inspire you to think a little bit differently now that you all know that you're copyright holders and the copyright law is about you. Each of you owns copyright. Each of you, as citizens, pays for copyrighted works to be produced by governments and civil society every day. These works belong to you. And I want to talk about 3 things. First, building for the public good. This should not be about open versus closed. It should be about a public commons and private benefits. And it's not, as I said, an either-or scenario. The public commons is made up of things everyone can use for personal profit or for the public good, for the benefit of all of us, to the exclusion of no one. We all have the works and we can all use them at the same time for various outcomes. We all profit because we can all access it equally, and that was the intention. We should optimize for this wherever possible, and especially with the things that we funded together through our governments. We should expect our public investments to create public goods, but increasingly, institutions are starting to get this. This is an op-ed that I wrote for Wired about a year ago about how publicly funded research should be public available for everyone. It might shock you to find out that that's not true. Most of the research that is funded by you and by governments around the world goes to private publishers and sits behind paywalls where you pay $40 an article to read it. It's obscene. You paid for these works. They should be yours to read. But governments are coming around. The European Commission has recommended CC licenses to all public institutions for content and data, and the Horizon 2020 program, which is part of the EU, now will require all EU-funded research to be open by 2020. This is fantastic work, and it's a really, really important development for all of us. In education, we're seeing openness there as well, and it's so much more than just savings. It unlocks customization to speak to marginalized groups. It allows things to be adapted at the speed of Wikipedia. Secondly, make copyright work like the web. The web's dynamic, constantly updated, searchable, and global, but there is no global registry. So CC has created CC Search as a tool to allow people to search the whole commons. It will be a total global registry of all of the CC licensed works, those 1.2 billion works, an API to allow you to access it, and a front door to the commons so that people can search and reuse those works. Finally, we need new business models. Creators can't all create for free, though many millions of them do and always will choose to. From music streaming services to the ad blocker debate, the fundamental question is about how we allow creators to create for a living. We have not remotely solved this, and we have to. The solution's going to require transparency from those who are the large rights holders, and we're going to need to expect that, or else their business models will be at risk as well. These are all radical ideas in an entrenched culture of individualism. The collaboration is actually the true story of us. We need a renewed copyright law that works towards the future, not the arcane past, for the benefit of each of us and for all of us. Thank you very much.